In 1951, the teenage son of an American diplomat arrived in Ireland, where his father had been posted by the State Department. That young man, Richard D Kehm, was a keen railroad enthusiast, and he owned a cine camera. Between 1951 and 1953, when the family left Ireland, and in visits later in the 1950s, when as a GI Richard was posted to Germany, he set out to record as much of Ireland's railway system as he could on cine. In this programme we are pleased to present this first selection of his films to be published. Our railway odyssey begins at Ennis in County Clare. D17 class 440, number 55, arrives there with the 8:50 a.m. train from Galway to Limerick. Richard Kehm had come to Ennis to travel on the West Clare-Nara gauge and to see the brand new rail cars which had been introduced to work the line's passenger services in 1952. Four rail cars were delivered to replace steam locomotives on the line's passenger services. They were similar to those in use since the 1930s on the County Donegal-Nara gauge. The power bogies were built by the Wigan firm of Walker Brothers. The passenger saloons were constructed by CIE at Inchicore Works in Dublin. To run with the new rail cars, lightweight trailers were built at Inchicore. Railcar number 3389 arrives at Quilty with the 4:55 p.m. service from Ennis to Kilkee. The line from Ennis divided at Moyasta Junction. Number 3386 leaves with the 11 a.m. service from Ennis to Kilkee, while the connecting train to Kilrush is provided by railcar number 3387. Steam locomotives were still in use on the line's goods trains in 1952, and for the first time in this series we were able to provide footage of West Clare steam in action. Number 5, originally named Slieve Callan after County Clare's highest mountain, and the only West Clare locomotive to have been preserved, leaves Corofin with the goods to Kilkee. Built by Dubbs and Company in Glasgow, one of three 062 tank locomotives delivered in 1892 at a cost of £1,750 each, number 5 is seen here approaching Moyasta Junction. At Kilkee, the steam locomotive shunts the wagons it has brought from Ennis. One unusual feature of these machines was that both the driving and trailing wheels were the same size. Number 5 is shunting the stock which will form the 3:30 p.m. goods from Kilkee to Kilrush. The line of carriages, headed by two originally built for the Tralee and Dingle Railway, had been rendered largely redundant with the arrival of the rail cars, one of which is seen here arriving at Moyasta Junction with a 5:15 p.m. service from Kilkee to Ennis. When Richard Kehm revisited the system in the summer of 1957, CIE's modernisation programme had been completed. The railcars working the passenger services had been complemented by the three new diesel locomotives, which now handled the line's goods trains. The railcars, like their cousins on the County Donegal-Nara gauge, could be driven from one end only and had to be turned to termini. One of the quartet is here being made ready at Ennis to work a service to Kilkee. The railcar with a trailer and van behind await departure time in the Norrigage Bay platform at Ennis Station. At Moyasta Junction, as a railcar leaves for Kilkee, artefacts of the steam age, in the form of the water tank and column, can still be observed. The connecting railcar departs for Kilrush. At Kilrush, the railcar has been turned for the journey back to the junction. The introduction of the railcars led to the opening of new halts and more frequent services. No one can fault CIE for their efforts to modernise the West Clare, though in the end this did not save the line. At the time of its closure on the 31st of January 1961, it was the last survivor of over 430 miles of Norrigage Railway, which were once open for the service of the public throughout Ireland. Our final views of the line were taken at Kilkee. A railcar leaves at the start of its 48-mile run to Ennis. The last train of the day approaches its terminus. The railcar is turned on the table, specially lengthened to take these vehicles, before being run into its shed for the night, at the end of another day's work on the railway. By 1957, the motive power on the Galway to Limerick line had changed from that recorded in 1952, as A-class diesel A33 is seen arriving at Ennis. The delivery of the Metropolitan Vickers A and C-class diesels between 1955 and 1957 led to the virtual banishment of steam from frontline duties on the CIE network in a remarkably short period of time. A J15-060 shunts the stock of the Galway train at Limerick, while the service on the other platform to Limerick Junction is formed by a set of rail cars. By 1957, it was rare to find steam on other than menial duties, such as that of station pilot at Limerick, which the J15 was performing. A mere 5 years before, the situation was very different at Limerick and Limerick Junction. D4 Class 440 number 335 stands at Limerick Station with the 12:15 train to Waterford. D17 440 number 54 was the station pilot that day. From Limerick we now travel the 22 miles to that most famous of locations on the Irish Railway network, Limerick Junction. From its opening in 1848 until CIE rearranged the track In 1967, every train on the Dublin to Cork main line which called there had to reverse to reach its single mainline platform. .460 number 403 reverses with the Tralee portion of the 10:30 a.m. from Dublin. The next down train, the Cork portion of the 10:30 from Dublin, is hauled by number 802 Tolcha, one of the trio of 460s introduced by the Great Southern in 1939, the largest steam locomotives ever to run in Ireland. From October 1950 until 1953, the morning Belfast to Dublin Enterprise Express ran through to Cork. A CIE set was used in the balancing working from Cork to Belfast. Here, the 406 brings the 115 Cork to Belfast Enterprise into Limerick Junction, providing the most unusual spectacle of Great Northern coaches reversing over the junction's famous crossovers. From Limerick Junction we head south to Mill Street on the Mallow to Tralee line, where 260 number 384 arrives with a Cork to Tralee service. Some 14 miles west of Mill Street was Headford Junction, from where the 22-mile-long Kenmare branch left the main line. The Kenmare branch was built under the provisions of the Light Railways Act of 1889. Here the 11 a.m. mixed train from Headford Junction to Kenmare, headed by J15 number 193, takes water at Morley's Bridge, roughly halfway along the branch. At the next station, Kilgarvan, some wagons are shunted by gravity into the goods siding. On arrival at Kenmare, number 193 runs round her train and begins to shunt the wagons she has brought to the town. Number 193 was built by the Great Southern and Western Railway at Inchicore in 1898 and was finally withdrawn by CIE in 1963. The guard makes up the train with loaded wagons and six-wheel passenger coaches for the return journey. Shunting completed, number 193 is turned on the turntable. The Kenmare branch was closed to all traffic on the 31st of December 1959. The donkey and cart delivering goods to the station were a form of transport even more venerable than the Kenmare branch train. Back at Headford Junction, Woolwich Muggle number 384 departs with the 9:25 a.m. Tralee to Dublin train, which includes in its formation a former Pullman car, one of only 3 ever to run in Ireland. When the railway reached Killarney in 1853, it terminated there. The westward extension to Tralee did not open until 1859. From that time to the present day, all trains to and from Tralee have had to reverse in and out of Killarney's single platform. Tralee was 22 miles to the west of Killarney, and up to 1953 it was the starting point for one of Ireland's most famous stretches of railway, the 3-foot gauge Tralee and Dingle line, which is our next destination. This is an hour gauge station at Tralee in July 1952. Passenger services on the Tralee and Dingle section had succumbed in 1939, and regular goods services ended in 1947. From then until the line's complete closure in the summer of 1953, its only traffic was a monthly cattle special for the fair at Dingle. Enthusiasts came from far and wide to travel and record these trains. Richard Kehm's visit was in July 1952, when the only 3 locomotives in serviceable condition, numbers 1, 2 and 8, were steamed in anticipation of the traffic. The empty stock for the cattle specials was marshalled at Tralee. All 3 locos in use were the products of the Hunslet Engine Company in Leeds. Numbers 1 and 2 were built in 1889. Number 8 was the last engine acquired by the Tralee and Dingle Company when it arrived in 1910. The first special hauled by the 260 tanks, numbers 8 and 1, has stopped to enable the locos to take water at Castle Gregory Junction. The branch from here to Castle Gregory closed to all traffic in 1939. The first 10 miles from Tralee to the junction were relatively level. The fearsome gradients for which the line was famous now began. The 4 miles from the junction to Glenagold were on a gradient of about 1 in 31. Progress was so sedate that Richard Kehm, who was travelling on the train, was able to hop off and run ahead to get these shots as the cavalcade neared the summit. Number 8 is the leading locomotive, piloting number 1. The stiff gradients and sharp curves for which the Tralee and Dingle was notorious were the result of it being built as cheaply as possible. The line, which opened in the 1890s, cost only £2,700 per mile to construct. As the locomotives toiled up the last stretch to the summit, there was clearly little chance that Richard would be left behind. The second special, hauled by number 2, arrives at Enniscull, some 20 miles from Tralee. From the end of the platforms at Enniscull, the line began another severe climb to its second summit at Garrynadour, on gradients as steep as 1 in 30. At the isolated crossing of Ballinaclare in the middle of the bank, the special halts to unload fence posts for the ganger who lived in the cottage there. Without further adventures, Dingle is reached. The station's overall roof is still in good repair. Number 2 shunts some cattle wagons in readiness for the fair, which will take place the next day. The 3 locomotives, having been serviced and turned, are parked for the night at Dingle. The next morning, number 2 has her tanks topped up before shunting the yard. A branch, about a mile long, which was abandoned in the 1930s to the pier at Dingle, had continued on past the white cottage behind the locomotive. These rails on the pier at Dingle were the most westerly in the whole of Europe. The shunting completed, number 2 backs on to her train. We pick up the return workings at Annascull as number 2 arrives there with the first train. The grades were even steeper going eastwards, and of course in this direction the trains were laden with cattle. Number 2 blasts out of Annascull to tackle the 1 in 29 gradients on the way up to Glenagolt. On this occasion, number 2 did not quite make it and has had to stop to build up steam pressure before it can breast the summit. Number 2 and her train eventually made it to Castle Gregory Junction. The banks are behind it now and there should be no more difficulties on the last stretch back to Tralee. The locomotive takes on water at Castle Gregory Junction. The crew also take on liquid refreshment here at Fitzgerald's Bar, conveniently sited across the road from the railway. Back at Tralee, the cattle are unloaded from the wagons. Many photographs have been published of these famous specials, but are we right in thinking that Richard Kehm is the only one who has actually provided evidence for posterity that these trains did convey livestock? The cattle unloaded, number 1 puts the stock away in the sidings. Neither stock nor loco will be required for another month when the battle with the gradients of the line will be rejoined again. From Kerry we moved to the neighbouring county of Cork, where in 1957 both steam and diesel traction are seen in action. Diesel A41 runs round its train at Glanmire Road Station in Cork City. The station pilot is a surprisingly clean J15, number 104, built at Inchicore in 1873. An 060 tank shunts in the guage yard at Glanmire Road. Cork still had 2 stations in the 1950s, and transfer freights between them were often hauled by steam locomotives through the streets of the city on the tramway which linked Glanmire Road, where trains from Dublin terminated, to Albert Quay, the station of the former Cork, Bandon and South Coast Railway. Though normal passenger and goods services on the lines to West Cork had been dieselised by this time, a few steam engines could still be found at Albert Quay. J26 class 060 number 552, built by the Midland Great Western Railway, one of several members of this class which ended their days on the West Cork lines, potters round the yard at Albert Quay and under the distinctive signal box which spanned one of the tracks. A 3-piece railcar set arrives at Albert Quay. Richard Kehm travelled on the West Cork lines in 1957. At Drimoleague, the main line divided. The railcar is bound for Bantry, while the train at the platform headed by C-Class diesel C217 is for Baltimore, the most southerly station on Ireland's railway network. C217 runs round her train at Baltimore. The same loco was seen the next day at Skibbereen, formerly the junction for the 3-foot gauge Scullin-Skibbereen tramway. The C-class diesels were smaller and less powerful versions of the A-class seen earlier, and were designed for use on secondary routes such as this. A train of rail cars arrives at Bandon. The signalman shows the staff for the single-line section ahead to the driver, but actually gives it to the guard, who throws the staff for the section from Clonakilty Junction to Bandon onto the platform. One day in the summer of 1952, Richard Kehm took the 9:35 a.m. railcar from Dublin to Waterford, as far as Kildare. His film record of the comings and goings in the Dublin to Cork main line that day, at a time when steam locomotives were still dominant on CIE's premier route, is probably unique. The first down train is the 10 a.m. Dublin to Thurles, headed by what looks like a D2 class 440. The first up train recorded is the 8 a.m. from Clonmel to Dublin, behind an unidentified 440. Number 800 Maeve, the first of the 3 800 class locomotives, the largest ever to run in Ireland, passes through Kildare non-stop with the 10:30 to Cork. A 260 hurries the 8 a.m. Cork to Dublin train along about half a mile from Kildare station. One of the former Pullman cars is included in its formation. By way of contrast, the express is followed by a short goods train with 2 J15s at its head. The next down train is the Killarney Express, 11:45 a.m. from Dublin to Killarney and Tralee, which also has a former Pullman car in its formation. This is followed by the Great Northern rake of coaches on the Belfast to Cork Enterprise, hauled by a 400 class 460. The 12 noon from Cork calls at Kildare. The loco is D4 class 440, number 333. Railcars 2602 and 2603 form the 5 p.m. service to Waterford. The 4:20 p.m. Thurles to Dublin train passes through non-stop. The next down train, the 5:30 p.m. Dublin to Thurles service, hurries through Kildare. The railcars which had been introduced that year seemed to be used only on the Waterford services. The set which had brought Richard to Kildare that morning returned to Dublin as a 3:50 p.m. from Waterford. As twilight encroaches, this wonderful record of a day at Kildare in the heyday of steam ends with the departure of the 8 p.m. from Dublin to Cork, the night mail. For the first time in this series, we visit Harcourt Street Station in Dublin. The closure of this line in 1959 was surely one of the most short-sighted acts of CIE and its political masters. For most of its final years, the service was provided by rail cars, but Richard Kehm recorded this route and others of the former Dublin and South Eastern Railway when steam held sway. Here, 240 number 652 leaves Harcourt Street at the 9:50 a.m. to Bray. Trains pass at Stillorgan, with another 240, number 650, arriving with the service from Harcourt Street. A Bray train leaves Fox Rock, to which we will return for a fascinating sequence later in this programme. The line from Harcourt Street joined the coastal route from Westland Row and Dunleary here at Shangana Junction near Bray. At Bray, D14 Class 440 number 86 takes water while working the 10:15 a.m. Dublin to Rosslare Harbour train. At Woodenbridge, formerly the junction for the branch to Shillelagh, which lost its services in 1944, D4 Class 440 number 334 arrives at the 9:40 a.m. from Rosslare. The Rosslare train pauses at Wexford. The members of the Irish Railway Record Society, who are travelling on the train that day, have a chance to stretch their legs and observe the locos simmering outside Wexford shed. The Rosslare train leaves the station and proceeds slowly along Wexford's quays. Later in the day, D4 Class 440 number 339 approaches Rosslare Strand, the 2:50 p.m. train from Westland Row in Dublin to Rosslare Harbour. As promised, we have returned to Fox Rock, 6 miles out of Dublin on the Harcourt Street line. It is Boxing Day, the 26th of December 1952, and a great many Dubliners are bent on having a day at Leopardstown Racetrack, which was near Fox Rock Station. 442 tank number 457 leaves Fox Rock with a train of empty stock for Harcourt Street at 11:10 a.m. The first of many specials, the 11:20 from Harcourt Street, arrives at Fox Rock behind 442 tank number 455. As the racegoers detrain from the assortment of six-wheelers which make up most of the set, the locomotive runs round to take the carriages back to Harcourt Street to form another special. Built in 1911 by the Dublin South Eastern at their Grand Canal Street works, numbered 20 and named King George, this was one of a number of tank engines employed on the frequent suburban services on both the Harcourt Street and coastal routes between Dublin and Bray. These attractive tank engines were designated the C2 class by the Great Southern and CIE. Number 455 was one of the last survivors of this type when it was withdrawn from service by CIE in 1959. The next special, the 1140 from Harcourt Street, is hauled by 460 tank number 466. This engine was the last of a series of locos built by Bear Peacock between 1906 and 1920 for the Cork Bandon and South Coast Railway. The next arrival is an ordinary service train, the 1155 from Harcourt Street, hauled by D4 Class 440, number 336. In their haste to get to the racetrack, some passengers open doors on the non-platform side of the train and jump onto the ballast, putting themselves in considerable peril as 240 number 650 arrives with the 12 noon Bray to Harcourt Street. On this service too, doors open before the train stops and crowds of people surge across the track. .442 tank number 457, which we saw leaving Fox Rock with empty carriages at the start of this sequence, now returns with the third special, 1215 from Harcourt Street. Number 457 runs round its train. The final special brings another type of tank locomotive to Fox Rock. 062 tank number 670 arrives with the 1230 from Harcourt Street. It has barely reached the platform before some of those more kamikaze racegoers leap from the carriages. The end of quite a Boxing Day morning at Fox Rock. We have seen Great Northern coaches on the Cork Main Line earlier in the programme, but here at Amiens Street Station in Dublin, for the first time in the course of this odyssey, we are in Great Northern territory. A rail car leaves for Howth, which is our next destination. A three-car set of Great Northern AEC rail cars, the design on which the CIE rail cars we have seen earlier was based, leaves the Dublin to Belfast main line at Howth Junction. Another set, in the attractive blue and cream livery in which the Great Northern turned out its rail cars, leaves Sutton for Howth. Sutton, where the tram sheds and power station were located, is the starting point for Richard Kehm's film of the GNR's Hill of Howth tramway. A tram leaves Sutton Station, bound for the summit. The tramway, located just north of Dublin, linked the stations at Sutton and Howth via the scenic Hill of Howth. We have shown some footage of this famous line in other programmes in this series, but this film, made by Richard Kehm in 1952, is the most comprehensive record of the tramway we have seen to date. Having crossed the Howth to Dublin Road at Sutton Cross, the track proceeded along Strand Road, next to the sea. The tramway was built to the Irish standard gauge of 5'3". It was single track throughout with passing loops. Opened in 1901 by the Great Northern Railway, it was closed by CIE in 1959, by which time it was the last passenger-carrying electric tramway in the country. The Hill of Howth tram is still fondly remembered by Dubliners to this day. From Strand Road, the tramway began the long climb towards the summit of the Hill of Howth. The track, laid with wooden sleepers like conventional railway track, was located by the side of the road, well out of the way of road traffic. Eight tram cars were built for the opening of the line by the British Electrical Company of Loughborough. They ran on brill trucks and seated 30 passengers inside and 37 upstairs. Car number 6 climbs from Bailey Post Office towards Maxwell's Corner. Further up the line, number 3 drifts down from the summit towards Sutton at Stella Maris. In 1903, 2 additional trams were built. Numbers 9 and 10 were slightly larger than the original cars, being able to accommodate 73 passengers. This pair retained the earlier teak livery, similar to that used on the railway's coaching stock, while the original cars were painted in the blue and cream colour scheme seen in the GNR's diesel rail cars. From end to end, the tramway was 5¼ miles long, and Howth Summit was 407 feet above sea level. Heading down from the summit towards Howth, number 3 approaches Kitestown Road. On the downhill stretches, the trolley pole was not attached to the overhead wire to save wear and tear on both the trolley and the overhead. Car number 3 arrives at the loop at Dungriffin Road on its way from Howth to the summit. There were 11 passing loops on the tramway. The driver of number 3 leaves his cab to operate the signal switch in the loop to warn any cars arriving at the next loop up the hill that he is about to enter the single track section ahead, and that they should not proceed into that section until he has cleared it and arrived at the next crossing point. Car number 5 is seen on Maglue's Bank, near Howth. The same car, number 5, is trolley pole tied down, enters Island View Loop on its way to Howth. The only cutting on the line was called Kruger's Cutting. Its name reflects the fact that the Boer War was raging in faraway South Africa at the time when the tramway was being constructed. Such a name would have had a great resonance at that time. The tramway terminated at Howth railway station. Cars had to climb sharply from the moment they got underway in order to cross the Howth to Dublin road on a bridge. The next station north of Howth Junction on the Great Northern Line to Belfast was Portmarnock. In 1952, Richard Kehm filmed all the traffic using this line over a period of several hours. B-Class Compound number 84 Falcon hurries the 8:15 a.m. express from Belfast on the last leg of its 3-hour journey to Dublin. An AEC railcar set is used on a stopping service to Donabate. One of the Great Northern's SG Class 060s hauls the first goods train to be recorded towards Dublin. The Enterprise Express, the 10:30 a.m. from Belfast to Dublin and Cork, is formed by the CIE set of coaches, hauled by a GNR VS Class 440. A local service to Drogheda is the next train in the other direction. This is followed 10 minutes later by another down-stopping train. This time the rail cars are strengthened by the addition of a carriage at the rear. Steam locomotives were still used on some local services. 442 tank number 5 holds a stopping train which will terminate at Donabate. A local pickup goods hurries by behind an unidentified 060. This is followed by a long Dublin-bound goods, hauled by another unidentified 060. The next up train was a through working from Omagh to Dublin via Clonus, headed by one of the U-class 440s built by Bayer Peacock in 1948. One of the GNR's most powerful 060s, SG3 class number 97, powers are down goods. A V-class compound 440 heads an afternoon northbound express. An S-class 440 heads for Dublin. The final train seen in this sequence, filmed on the GNR main line nearly 50 years ago, is formed by articulated railcar G working a stopping service to Balbriggan. For the final part of this programme we will take a trip north up the Great Northern Main Line. This is the view from the cab of a railcar as it crosses the viaduct over the River Boyne just north of Drogheda Station. The train, the 7:30 a.m. from Dublin to Belfast, passes through Castle Bellingham Station, south of Dundalk. The train arrives at Dundalk, where of course the Great Northern's works, covered in Volume 5 of this series, were located. U-Class number 200, Lochmelvin, leaves Dundalk with the 8:40 a.m. stopping service to Dublin. North of Dundalk, the rail cars climb towards the summit of the line and bring us for the first time in this programme into Northern Ireland. V-Class Compound 440 number 86 Peregrine arrives at Gora Wood with the 8:15 a.m. express from Belfast to Dublin. .442 tank number 63 is seen on a stopping train from Belfast to Portadown. Near Lisburn, a long goods train is passed. Arrival at Great Victoria Street Station, the Great Northern Terminus in Belfast, is on schedule at 10:20. And one of the other platforms of ES class loco waits to depart with the 10:30 a.m. Enterprise to Cork. Railcars forming the 9:50 a.m. service from Banbridge, a location we will visit in the next volume in this series, arrive at Great Victoria Street. In 1952, trams were still running in Belfast. These cars, seen on the Queen's Bridge, served Queen's Quay Station, which is also our destination. In 1950, the Ulster Transport Authority had closed down all of the former Belfast and County Down system, except for the branch to Bangor. The UTA began to introduce modern multiple-engine diesel rail cars on this busy line from 1951 onwards. Here a set of rail cars hurries through Hollywood on a non-stop service. For a short while, before it was fully dieselised, the rail cars shared the working of the Bangor line with steam locomotives. Some WT Class 264 tanks were brought over from the former NCC system. Here number 10 leaves Belfast Queen's Quay Station with a train for Bangor, mostly composed of old BCDR six-wheelers. Sister locomotive number 50 arrives at Queen's Quay with the 12:25 p.m. from Bangor. As the loco runs round its train, the next departure from Queen's Quay gives us the first ever opportunity in this series to see a Belfast and County Down Railway steam locomotive in action. Number 222 was the first of four 464 or Baltic tanks, built in 1920 by Bayer Peacock for the BCDR. These handsome machines, which flattered to deceive in terms of their performance, were restricted to the Bangor line because of their weight. They had a prodigious appetite for coal, yet were poor steamers. Number 222 ran for the last time in 1953, the year after these scenes had been recorded. As the loco leaves Sydenham for Bangor, we conclude this first selection at Kehm's Irish Ruby Films. The next programme in this series, Irish Ruby's Volume 9, will present more of Richard Kehm's Irish Ruby Films. The programme will offer a rich mixture of trains and locations on both the Irish broad and narrow gauges. We therefore conclude this programme with some scenes from the next volume in the series.